We shouldn't be using these tools to make decisions for us. Seems like a scary idea, but it's kind of the reality that we live in. The more that we train models that we interact with, the more likely it's going to be accurate. Coaching in sales, we have coaching in customer support, where people are listening in on calls and budding up. I've never, ever heard of quality assurance in recruiting. And so when we start to say, like, what is the value of TA when we have these big slowdown events and stuff like that we're seeing, it's all of this. People don't understand the kind of level of information and that we're going through and the types of conversations we're having all the time. It means that you as an organization all of a sudden have the most accurate, up-to-date, real-time compensation information that you could possibly, Bradford's no longer exists at this stage. I don't think this is going to be taking away jobs. I think it's going to be pushing us to be more intellectual with how we think about recruiting and how we think about the use of data.
Hello, Matthew. How's it going?
Hey, Chris. Yeah, good. How are you?
Not bad, not bad. I think we've got some really exciting stuff to talk about today. It's on top of everyone's mind.
Yeah.
But I think you've got a really interesting take on it, actually. So we're going to speak about AI and how it's going to impact, the life of recruitment and the recruitment industry as a whole. I think it's on the top of everyone's mind. Is it going to take away capability and replace jobs? Is it going to supercharge everyone? Make more jobs or change the role of a recruiter, and make the industry more powerful and the position more strategic. So I know you've got some really interesting views on this. So maybe we can start there.
Yeah, I mean, it is hard to exist in the world of technology at the moment and not be talking about AI. And so, yeah, the unsolicited perspective that no one ever asked for is here. Look, I think the where I kind of get really interested in AI is when we're applying it to kind of the already existing interactions of conversations that recruiters are having every single day, right? The recruiters have hundreds of conversations, even sometimes even a week, right? Like they're speaking to candidates every single day, and each of these moments with the context of AI behind them is potentially a data collection opportunity with the advent of things, of like natural language processing and massive large language models that can interpret and use this data in a way that's never kind of been able to be used before. And so when I think about the future of kind of AI, I think about like the opportunity to collect data and use that as a way to position the talent acquisition function as a extraordinarily valuable asset in the context of our HR, organization and our entire business. And this is where I think there's going to be a genuine game-changing kind of opportunity in the next, potentially even within the next 5 years, potentially even sooner than that, when it comes to things like interview transcriptions.
Mm-hmm. And so if we kind of dive into that transcription feature and use case, like, what do you think is so powerful about the potential there?
Yeah, I mean, so I think looking at it from a absolute basic level, right? It's what's actually happening in the interview, and how can we, gather data from these interactions that are happening in the interview. So I think, just to kind of take a step back, what is an interview transcription service? I mean, basically, there's quite a few of these now. Companies like MetaView or BrightHire or ScreenLoop, all existed before the kind of advent of businesses like OpenAI, but they've really been supercharged through being able to layer on a kind of infrastructure of natural language processing to understand what's actually happening, right? So essentially, they're just sitting in the background of interviews with the candidate's consent and just transcribing everything that's happening in the interview. So it's the questions that you're asking, the responses you're receiving, and from this you can start to extract certain types of data. So when we look at most of them now, when they're layering on things like OpenAI, are able to say, here's in kind of a paragraph what happened in that interview. And so this in kind of the most basic sense right now today, if you're using kind of an interview transcription tool, you're essentially able to create a summary and a note of record of everything that happened in an interview. The idea, I think, and kind of consistently across all of these tools, is that they're trying to make the interview experience better. They're trying to take away the operational kind of workload of either the recruiter or the hiring manager in typing up really, really detailed notes, or just typing up notes at all. How many of us never receive any notes from stakeholders that are doing interviewing? and are then making those sorts of interactions easier. So that's where I think we're basically at today. And then some of them are able to kind of, add in some analytics on top of that, things like talk time or, what questions were asked in the interview. And so we're at the really still, from my perspective, at the kind of the seedling stage of what interview transcription tools can really do in the kind of context of the industry. Before, like, I think we get on to, like, and I'm conscious, I'm talking, but before we get on to kind of what the future could look like, it's really important to contextualize, we shouldn't be using these tools to make decisions for us as a hiring organization, right? So, and this is even this can even come into really minute things as in like, if a AI summary tool is saying, yeah, my interview, Chris gave some really good examples of how he scaled technology companies as a recruiter. Already, that, because they've used the term good and there's positive language layered into that summary and that interpretation, this AI is immediately biased us because because it's putting in positive sentiment. So I think we need to be really so it's amazing we have this tool and capability now that we didn't have 6 months ago, really, in summarizing notes that were that were happening from our conversations that were happening. But what does it mean if there's but we need to put some controls and be really thoughtful with what those notes are actually saying and who's in the driver's seat of interpreting those notes and using those notes in the future. Because otherwise we could end up not being needed, going down the route of not needing a recruiter and just letting them all, letting AI just do the interview for us.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question there. That, how do you avoid bias? Because there's some inherent bias in the language model themselves, right? And but is there more bias in a language model than there is in a human being? Just naturally anyway. So it's the same thing with self-driving cars, right? It's like, yes, there will be deaths and crashes with self-driving cars, but significantly less than human error cause crashes, right? So that's a really interesting kind of viewpoint, is how do you remove the bias, and what is how do you allow the human to make the decision within those parameters?
Yeah, so it's a good question, right? But so for me, the note taking is, and I've done, anyone who's ever worked with me or seen a presentation that I've done about assessment methodology, I've always had an entire slide dedicated to note taking and how to take really, really good notes. And I guess there's like kind of two elements to it. One is, you're trying to transcribe the conversation, right, to make sure that you are collecting accurate data to be able to make an informed decision. And I think this is like one of the biggest superpowers of these sorts of tools, right? You're actually collecting the core, every single piece of information that is objectively happening through the interview. So instead of saying, "Oh, I thought they did," I thought they talked about this quite well, or got the sense that they were quite good at this, the AI could say, "No, they actually said this." And you have a core record that says, this is what they actually said. And in theory, right, this will reduce bias because we have an evidence-based understanding of what is actually happening in a conversation that can help us make a more informed decision. But that informed decision and what we take away from that conversation needs to be ultimately summarized by a human. So I think if I was building one of these tools right now, I would, yes, allow there to be kind of an element of summarization of the overall conversation, because no one's going to read through an hour-long transcription or a half an hour-long transcription. So I think that summarization is great, but the final word and the overall opinion should be written by a human. And even better, I'd love to see a world where if I wrote something that was an opinion, that was like that the AI could recognize that actually that was not said at all during the conversation. So if I said, Chris seemed like a really good bloke, and it would be like the AI would kind of identify that and go, that why did you say that? What led you to indicate that was the right case? Was there any data from the transcription that you get a tag to that comment that would make him seem like he was, that was true, and really push us to make more informed decisions.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, you hopefully you would remove a lot of those. Yeah, I'm not sure they're the right fit kind of comments, which we all get.
What does that mean? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I know recruiters around the world have been trying to get to a place where they eliminate that from the vocabulary of hiring managers. But if you had these really detailed evidence-based notes that you're saying, it would be a lot easier to reference, and to have some real pushback on those kind of comments. So yeah, I think that's really interesting. I guess, where do you see, you said that, where we are right now, and you gave some examples of the tools and the capabilities that that anyone could probably use right now. What do you think the progression is? Like, where do you think this can go? And what do you think are the really exciting things from your perspective that this can lead to?
Yeah, I'm really excited about how this can change the future of recruiting, to be honest. So, if we just stop a moment to think, what are the kind of every single recruiting conversation, let's just say just the recruiter, what information are we instructing them as recruiting leaders to collect at probably the end of that call? Just off the top of your head.
Salaries.
Salary.
Notice periods.
Notice periods, yeah.
Where they may be interviewing or other interview processes. Where they want to work, how they want to work, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's just take salary and let's just take notice period, right? So if we are able to if we're transcribing, let's say you have, 20 roles available, 20 software engineering roles that you have open at the moment, and they may be split across 3 different levels. So for each, and let's say you maybe you have a recruiter that's doing 20 screens per role, so it's 400 screens overall, so maybe 130 screens that they'll do per level per role. If they are asking the same question of, what are your salary expectations for your next role? What's your notice period? What are the key things you're looking for in your next role? But let's just say now salary notice period. It wouldn't take a very much training for a natural language processing model to basically identify that the response was, there was a salary question, a salary response with expectations or my current salary is, and then a number, and potentially an entire package that was able to detail. All of a sudden, you've gone from a space where there's all of these conversations that are completely dataless that happen within an organization. Best case scenario, you have an ATS that you're able to kind of log that information into, knowing for fact that every single conversation you're tracking a candidate's role, their salary expectations, and you're doing this hundreds of times, potentially across multiple recruiters 100 times a day or 100 times a week. That it means that you as an organization all of a sudden have the most accurate, up-to-date, real-time compensation information that you could possibly, Bradford's no longer exists at this stage, right? Because that's 6 months old, because you have what the current what the current market rate is for a software engineer at 3 different levels within your organization. And you can bring that and start driving the conversations within your compensation team, saying, hey, we've now spoken to 100 people. This is what our platform is saying all of their salaries are, and we need to be able to make some different types of decisions. And that's relatively basic. I think most of these models, are transcribing right now and could do this right now if they really wanted to. But then imagine you're the kind of company that's transcribing these. So you've gone away from Chris Abbas recruiting company, and we're now, interview recording company, and they're doing thousands of interviews a day. And they're able to identify what sort of, they're able to look at someone's CV, identify their level, be able to collect this information on a meta level. All of a sudden, you've gone from being an interview transcription tool, which is quite valuable to organization, but potentially seen as a must-have, not a nice-to-have, to all of a sudden, you are the most accurate compensation collection product ever made. And that's completely changed the way that we think about and talk about compensation. And instead of this being a third owned by the Comp and Ben's team, this is now collected and curated by the recruiting organization. It changes the strategic, nature of that conversation with the business and potentially the ownership of that conversation, because we eventually own this data. And this is stuff that we've been doing for years. This is just a mechanizing and a method of collecting the data that every single recruiting team has been collecting for decades. And so I think that's really exciting to me. Finally, we can get into conversations and create a level of value from all of the natural stuff that we in the recruiting team are doing every single day.
Talentful provides flexible recruiting solutions to the world's most ambitious companies. Are you thinking about ways to add flexibility to your talent function? With recent market volatility and hiring set to return to growth mode in the near future, there's never been a better time to choose the right partner to help you scale. Talentful's embedded sourcing, recruiting, coordination, and talent advisory services have been trusted by the world's leading brands. Companies such as Atlassian, Microsoft, Expedia, Pinterest, Waymo, and more. Whether you're hiring across engineering, go-to-market, or G&A, Talentful has got you covered. To find out how Talentful can help you, visit talentful.com. Yeah, I mean, yeah, all the notes that are on, notepads around the recruiters' notepads around the world will now be actually be putting to good use. Yeah, and then you can think about what you just said and the implications there for potential kind of forecasting and headcount planning and budgets. If you have all that information in real time, you can build a much more accurate forecast of, what growth would look like, for your business. And it has so many knock-on effects across the organization. Accurately predicting time to hire and time to fill. And
I mean, imagine a kind of a model that, if it was trained, could give you sentiment analysis. So, so this recruiter typically has a really good, and sentiment analysis exists. We do it. The companies do it with social media all the time. So it's not like this is a kind of a new technology concept that we'd have to completely rebuild from scratch. It's, trying to understand, how is someone responding to the information that I'm giving them? And how can and if we can start to measure those conversations and say, right, well, this recruiter pitch on this way of positioning this company is landing slightly better with these sorts of people than it is with these sorts of people. And all of a sudden we can use data to make our sales pitches more efficient to candidates, or to make, to understand their motivations better. Imagine if you could get a engagement score from all of the different conversations that a recruiter has managing a candidate through the process. And all of a sudden the transcription is that, the AI is saying this candidate's 70%, based on their responses throughout the process, they're 70% likely to accept your offer. They indicated 7 times that this is their top motivation. They've asked these questions, and it's not actually been covered. So therefore, here's what you need to do to help close this candidate. And again, it's not change. Good recruiters are doing this all the time. They're listening to motivations. They're understanding what's happening in the conversations from hiring managers. But it's just centralizing all of this data into a place which is usable for once, and easy to understand, which is just never. This has all just been manual work that a good recruiters have to go and chase, throughout the kind of process of a search.
And even, like you were saying, it gets to the end of the process and the AI could actually suggest an offer that has the optimal success rate of closing the candidate, potentially. that could be, I mean, my mind is just going in all kinds of directions now that we're into this conversation. But yeah, the options are kind of really vast for, and you're just talking about one use case of collecting, salary information and, these calls from recruiters. Is there anything else? Like, I know one of the things that a lot of people have talked about here with AI is like, candidate experience, and improving that element, because I think a lot of the reason why candidates get a hit or miss experience is because balls are dropped in the process, from maybe poor note taking or follow up or whatever else, things that maybe can be automated. So where do you see kind of AI stepping in and creating a better experience?
Well, I think it will help with training overall for interviewers. Firstly, I think I'll come on to the kind of candidate response bit in a second, but I think it will create a better kind of quality of interview. Right. So let's say, we're and this again kind of exists in Lightform, that happens in customer support quite a lot, but if you're in an interview and you have someone who's never been trained how to interview before, they don't know how to ask right questions. They don't know how to do follow-up questions and stuff like that. But you as a recruiting organization could code in what you want your flow of questions to be. Let's say you're looking to hire a recruiter and you ask them a first line question, how would you, manage a hiring manager through a complex process, or like, tell me about a time when. And then you could kind of funnel the sorts of responses that you'd like the kind of hiring manager or the interviewer to go through, and have kind of logic models built into to your conversations to say, if you're interviewing a product manager and they don't use data in some of their responses, a little pop-up comes up on your transcription service that says, hey, you should ask them for more information about data from that. So again, it's not telling you whether or not they're good or bad, but they are prompting you to ask a deeper question so you can drive towards a better outcome. And so I think this should, I'm really optimistic that this sort of stuff will level the playing field in lots of respects and will help us have better quality interviews. One of the things that when I kind of was thinking about this, I got really excited about was, I've done loads of interviewer training and I never know what the hell is going on in the interviews once I've like put the interviewer training out into the ether, and to be able to understand, like, did they use the questions that I even asked? And did they use, did they follow up and ask any second or third level questions when I asked them this, when we gave them that one, did they ask an illegal question? I think it's a really big one for companies. Like, and does the legal team want to know? I was talking to a company the other day saying that they were looking at kind of having red flags for certain interviewers. And would a legal team want to know whether or not they were kind of asking illegal questions, their interviewers were asking illegal questions or not? So I think there's a whole bunch of like training oriented kind of prompts that will exist. And then for the candidate experience, on the other side, I would love to see as a candidate, if someone was using these transcriptions, if they've got a recruiter that's receiving a summary, I'd also love to receive that summary, because then I'd be able to understand, like, and that you could start to layer in potentially some AI to kind of and sentiment to like how it went, and say, look, this isn't our official opinion, but broadly speaking, you answered these questions and you probably could have used more data. Or like, can we find a way for a candidate to proactively seek feedback from the transcription that they've also got on the back end, and it be a two-way marketplace for that for information? Because we're only really thinking about the information we're giving to the business, but actually we could give that same information back to a candidate and they could use it potentially to learn and be informed for the next conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's all absolutely fascinating. And I think, it's very clear that this is going to impact, recruiting in a huge way, whether it's, in 12 months time or 5 years time. I guess my question, and I think a lot of people are thinking about this, is for people that are in this job right now, what can they start doing to prepare for this change?
Yeah, I think, my viewpoint hasn't changed for the last few years on kind of what advice I would give to recruiters, and that's to really understand assessment philosophy and methodology. How do you build good assessment within your business? What does good assessment mean? What are like the ethics around certain processes? And really ask, if you have that information, regardless of whether or not you're running a transcription service or an interview assistant, knowing how to structure a really thorough and good interview process will mean that you can interrogate these sorts of conversations in a little bit more detail and have more knowledge to come into like whether or not this particular transcription tool is right for you, right? So if you have a philosophy on whether or not you could have sentiments leaned, as part of your, you should have an opinion on that, right? Or like whether or not you could use the term good in a review, or how is your note taking currently going, and do you need this? And then I'd also, try and get your hands on some of these tools if you can. They're here to help, and I think the more times that we use them, the more we interact with them, the better the data is that they're going to collect. And that might seem like a scary idea, but it's kind of the reality that we live in. The more that we train models that we interact with, the more likely they are to kind of be accurate. And then if I was a company, I'd really start thinking about the kind of the end-to-end process that is being applied to the that's happening in these interviews, right? Can we connect the dots of the role type? Can we connect the dots of into the applicant tracking system and really know what roles happening? Can we connect multiple interviews into one collective summary rather than just having each interview as a mutually exclusive event that's then summarized? Because that's sort of how it's working in a lot of them at the moment. And if we can start to combine this data into one piece and extract data from these conversations at an aggregate level, you can start to be a complete game changer to a talent leader versus focusing just on the end user, which is what's happening at the moment.
And if you're a talent leader right now and you're seeing all this evolution, you're listening to this podcast, like, how should you be thinking about like building your team? Does it change the kind of skill sets you bring in? Does it change the technology you're using? Should you be, if obviously budget permitting and stage permitting, but should you be implementing these tools as soon as possible so that you're collecting this data properly and you're ready for this shift? Like, what would you be doing if you were kind of joining a company fresh, or what are you doing now?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I would encourage kind of having this alongside your applicant tracking system sooner rather than later, because I think that it will give you the ability to have data-led interactions with hiring managers and interviewers much more in a way that you just couldn't do it before, right? So if we just take one product I was talking to, I won't name them specifically, but they were able to. Actually, I could name the Screen Loop. I've recently, obviously, I posted that their men, men are more likely to talk longer in interviews with women than they are with men, right? A really valuable use of data. But all of a sudden, it's not just like your opinion. It's a literal data collection from that interaction that enables you to be able to coach a team better. So, and I think this is especially relevant when you're working with founders or smaller businesses, because they often think that they are already amazing at interviewing, and actually you can use data to indicate that they might be making some decisions, or that there might be bias in their decisions, and it's not your opinion anymore. It's an objective fact based on the data you're collecting. So I think that it should be alongside an applicant tracking system, alongside kind of purchasing LinkedIn, that you should be kind of paying attention to interview transcription tools now. And then hopefully in a few years' time, that it will be a must-have for every single business. And I believe that they will.
Yeah. I've also thought the concept of this being a really good L&D and training tool, especially if you've got distributed and remote recruiting teams. One of the things with remote working now, and I think more junior recruiters, is they're not necessarily around hearing calls, listening to other people, picking things up. So being able to have the transcriptions of their recruiter screens and use that as a coaching moment and a coaching tool, I think could be really powerful as well for how recruitment teams are going to be built in the future.
Yeah, it's so funny, right? Because we have coaching in sales, we have coaching in customer support, where people are listening in on calls and budding up. I've never, ever heard of quality assurance in recruiting. But we have hundreds of interactions with recruiters a day. We only ever have candidates a day, if not potentially more in larger companies, right? Why do we not have quality assurance? And it's because we don't ever record these interactions. And I think that once that starts to become more kind of palatable to the businesses and to candidates, we'll start to have a richer and more value-add recruiting experience across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And we're the shop window to prospective employees, which is a huge task and huge responsibility. Obviously there's a lot of reasons why you'd put this in place, and I think a lot of it is to have this data set that is incredibly reliable and you can use for decision making. How do you measure the impact of the work or the benefit of that tool? Like how are you looking at it from a kind of actually delivering output in the company and measuring that impact?
Yeah, I think at the moment, it's a bit harder to do that with some of the tools that are kind of potentially a little bit earlier stage, right? I think a lot of what we talked about today is my vision of where these tools will be in a few years' time, and there's a reality where there is not a rich amount of data currently being collected, and so only some of these tools have an ability for you to gain insights from those conversations, but that's because they're focusing on a really good transcription capability, multiple languages, like how to and they all have the kind of a different USP that they're trying to focus on within the conversation itself. And that's really important, because if the product doesn't work for the user, i.e. me as the recruiter or me as the hiring manager, and it's not summarizing, it's not note taking accurately, then the product, no matter how good the analytics are in the background, it's never going to lift off the ground. So it's important to invest in getting the natural language models right now, and getting the summarization kind of competencies right now, so that you can then create a bit level of validity with the product. So, I know it's not necessarily what you asked, but I would, again, it's about getting the return on investment will be how valuable your your interviewers find the product in transcribing their interview notes, and the fact that you can showcase an increase in the note taking kind of capability of your entire organization, and then the sentiments from the recruiters saying they absolutely love it. I know most recruiters I speak to absolutely love these tools and makes their life so much easier. Which means that if you kind of aren't spending hours of your day, taking notes, you look at a cost analysis per hour of recruiter note taking, then all of a sudden you've got a real dollar amount that you can apply to these sorts of tools that will show a really strong return on investment.
Yeah. Do you think you could, is it at the stage where you could see increase in your recruiter productivity because they're not spending as much time on the admin side, or hiring manager surveys, or do you think just having better process and being more consistent through the interview with candidates will lead to like higher acceptance rates at this point? Are all those things worthwhile keeping an eye on, or is it just too loose at the moment, do you think?
I think, part of it depends on the platform. And I know, because we're not talking about one specific platform, we're talking kind of about groups of platforms that all have slightly different focuses. So, some are targeting, really looking at like the recruiter experience and making sure that that interaction is really, really good. But some are looking at like the entire end-to-end hiring manager and interviewer experience, and they're trying to kind of extract data from those interactions, and that can like lead to things like quality of hire. And they're looking at and there's different, and then some are looking at kind of the interview creation, right? So they're saying we can supply you with questions and we'll be able to prompt you with how you interact with candidates live in the interview, for example. And so it's hard to say what is the ROI of just one of them, because they all have slightly different focuses depending on what your business need is. And then there's also the question, how do you measure quality of hire, right? So it's I think that right now we don't have I think it's hard to measure. But I could see in the future, again, as we say, if I was running one of these businesses right now, I'd be looking to try and say, how can we show the finance team that this is an absolutely critical must-have, because we're going to be making really accurate decisions on things like compensation in the future, or things like quality of hire.
Yeah, awesome. And are there any tools that you have used or are using that you highly recommend in this space that other people could check out?
Yeah, I think there's a couple. MetaView is good. I know the team there a little bit, and the recruiters really, really like it. I think Screenloop are trying to do really interesting things with like the analytics that sit behind the talk conversations. They are not an AI first business. They're now integrating AI into the technology that they already had. So it's a little bit of a different kind of approach. And then BrightHire, I think, are taking a slightly more enterprise approach, which I quite like. They're looking at assessment methodology as a whole, and talking about kind of what questions we ask and loading that into the flow of the conversation, and having your kind of scorecards really built in an interactive way through the conversation. So I think that they are kind of all focusing on slightly different ends of the spectrum. And I think this is a representation of this is still early. People don't necessarily know what the actual ROI is yet of the products that they're building, in the next kind of 5 years, because they're just trying to keep up with releasing products and keeping, and interacting with the space as quickly as possible. But we're right at the bulb stage, as we say. So who knows? In 5 years' time, I think the stuff that we've talked about here will be table stakes, and it'll be onto something that we've not even thought of yet.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I could talk to you about this for hours. One final question before you go is, probably connected to what we've just been speaking about. What are you most excited about when you look into the future for TA?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it is of course this. You've heard the passion of which I talk about this world. But what I'm excited about, if I was to summarize this conversation, right, is we're finally able to extract data from conversations that we as a recruiting organization have been having for years. And so when we start to say, like, what is the value of TA when we have these big slowdown events and stuff like that we're seeing, it's all of this. People don't understand the kind of level of information and that we're going through, and the types of conversations we're having all the time. And this is going to, I think, bring a level of robustness to the work that we're doing, and potentially kind of increase the size of the fiefdoms that TA look after, and make us, as a result, a more resilient function as the kind of peaks and troughs of our industries, change. So I'm really excited about that for people's kind of livelihoods. I don't think this is going to be taking away jobs. I think it's going to be pushing us to be more intellectual with how we think about recruiting and how we think about the use of data. But that's only a good thing, and will only kind of improve the entire kind of spectrum of work that we do. So I'm really excited about what the future holds when we put more data and pull more data out of these conversations.
Awesome. And where can people find you?
Yeah, on LinkedIn, Matthew Parker, recruiting. I'm there. I'm writing a lot at the moment about these sorts of topics. So stay tuned and follow me there.
Awesome. Well, really good to speak to you, Matthew, and catch you soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Cheers.